Imagine building an entire life in a country that never recognizes you as the owner of your own dream. Ramon arrived in the United States carrying only one promise: to work hard, take care of his family, and try to stay invisible to the system that could destroy him at any moment. For 15 years, he was the pillar of his community, a loving father, and a respected foreman. But one day, everything changed in the blink of an eye. ICE agents knocked on his door, and the man who built houses with his own hands was ripped away from everything he had built, arrested, coldly judged, and deported without a chance to defend himself. This is Ramon's story, a story of struggle, loss, and hope, a story that needs to be heard, because behind every number, behind every file, there is a life that should never be forgotten.
Ramon woke up every day at 5. No alarm clock, no matter how tired he was. His body just knew. He'd get up slowly, brew strong coffee in a scratched-up machine, and drink it in silence while staring out the kitchen window, where the sun hadn't even thought about rising yet. Outside, the street was quiet. Neatly lined houses, trimmed lawns, American flags hanging from porches. It was a typical neighborhood in Riverside, California, a place where no one asked too many questions, and that was a good thing. 15 years had passed since Ramon arrived out of nowhere, carrying a name, a fear, and a promise. Now he had a house in his name, even if bought under someone else's number, 2 kids fluent in English, and a garage full of tools. He was a foreman. The guy who solved problems before they happened, who knew where to cut, where to measure, where to brace. He was the one Americans called when they wanted something done right. On site, everyone knew him as Big Ram. "That man works harder than 3 guys," the boss would say, laughing proudly. Ramon laughed too, but never showed his teeth. He knew his presence there was like a poorly anchored beam, solid at first glance, but always one step from collapse. Sundays were different. He slept in, made pancakes for the kids, washed the car with Matias, helped Sofia with math. At the end of the day, he went to church. "God helps those who work, mijo," he'd always say. And Clara would look at him with that tired affection, the love of someone who helped build a life even from far away in the beginning. To the community, Ramon was a role model, a family man, a good man. But on paper, he was still no one.
The July afternoon heat was thick and heavy as Ramon hauled bags of cement like they were part of his own body. It was a new construction site, a public school in East Riverside, and he led the crew with the precision of someone who knew what needed to be done before the blueprints were even printed. "Ramon, where does this beam go?" asked Kenny, a young American new to the crew, drenched in sweat. "Over there, in the corner. But you gotta line it up with that level, or the wall's gonna lean," Ramon said, without looking up. Kenny nodded, scribbling notes. Everyone on site listened to Ramon. He didn't yell or bark orders, he taught, and that was rare in construction. At exactly 10:30, he always stopped. That was when Clara called on her break, just to tell him Sofia had done well on her science test or that Matias needed new cleats. Small things, but they anchored Ramon. "How's your day going?" she'd ask. "Hot, but good. They're pouring the slab tomorrow." It was always like that. Work, kids, food. Life revolving around simple, essential things. Ramon lived with the discipline of someone who knew he couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Sometimes, during lunch, he'd sit alone at the edge of the site, looking out at the buildings in the distance. He thought about how all that, concrete, steel, structure, stood strong, while a man like him could be torn down with a single anonymous tip. But he'd shake the thought away and get back to work. Every brick was a prayer, every wall a promise to stay. He didn't want luxury. He just wanted to stay, and for that, he had to remain invisible, but indispensable.
In the neighborhood where Ramon lived, everyone knew who he was. Not by his full name, which few pronounced correctly, but by how he always showed up when someone needed help. When Mrs. Agnes's fence fell after a storm, Ramon fixed it without charging. When the elderly neighbor's car wouldn't start, he showed up with his own battery and a smile. At church, he was the first to arrive on Sundays and the last to leave, stacking chairs, cleaning bathrooms, lighting candles. "That man is more American than a lot of Americans," the pastor used to say, half joking, half serious. The neighborhood kids called him Mr. Ramon affectionately, and Sophia beamed when her classmates pointed him out in the school parking lot. "That's my dad," she'd say. "He built that house over there." The Latino community saw him as a role model. He had helped many fellow countrymen get jobs at construction sites, guided others on how to pay taxes with an ITIN, open bank accounts, avoid trouble. But Ramon avoided showing up too much. He didn't go to protests. He didn't sign petitions. When a friend got arrested for driving without a license, he stayed home for days. "We're only free until someone remembers we shouldn't be here," he told Clara one night, lying beside her with eyes wide open in the dark. She held his hand, said nothing. She knew any word could be a risk. On the surface, everything seemed stable. House, family, work, respect. But Ramon felt like he was building a home on sand. Everything he had could disappear in minutes. And he lived every day as if it would happen tomorrow.
It was a normal Friday. The sky was clear, the air dry and heavy as always. Ramon had just finished the last concrete pour of the month, his hands still stained with cement, when he called Clara. "I'll get home early today. Let's make tacos, like you like." "Only if you're the one cutting the onions," she laughed, relieved. Fridays were good days. Ramon always came home happy. But that afternoon, before leaving the site, something felt off. Two men in suits, not dressed like construction inspectors, showed up at the entrance, talking with the boss. Ramon saw the boss discreetly nod in his direction. He froze. "Hey, Ramon, these gentlemen want to talk to you. Can you come here for a moment?" Mike shouted, trying to sound casual. Ramon walked toward them as if crossing a glass bridge. "Mr. Garcia?" one asked, flashing a badge with the ICE logo, the acronym he'd feared for 15 years. "Can we talk for a minute?" The world stopped. The noise of the machines faded away. Ramon said nothing, just nodded, trying to steady his shaking legs. "We have reason to believe your documents are not valid. You'll need to come with us." "My kids, my wife," he whispered. "I work here. Everyone knows me." "It's nothing personal, sir. We're just following orders." Orders. Ramon raised his hand slowly. The co-workers watched in silence, like witnesses to something sacred being violated. No one dared to intervene, because everyone knew that in this country it only takes one detail to bring everything down. Ramon walked out handcuffed, under the hot sun, his dusty, cement-stained uniform. The same uniform that once earned respect. Now, it offered no protection.
The detention center was an hour and a half away from home, but to Clara, it felt like another planet. The bars, the colorless concrete, the indifferent faces of the guards, everything there seemed built to erase the existence of those inside. Ramon spent days without knowing where he was. No calls, no voices from his children. Locked in a cell with 16 men, all Latino,
all invisible. Some tried to hold on to hope with prayers. Others had given up, staring at the floor. "How long have you been here?" Ramon asked an older Mexican man with a lost look. 4 months. Been to court twice. Nobody listens. Ramon tried to keep his body steady, but his soul began to crack. The food was scarce. The night cold pierced the thin blankets, and the guards called him by a number. He was no longer Ramon. He was number 614982. In the first days, he believed it was a mistake, that everything would be fixed soon. After all, he paid taxes, had never committed a crime, and his children were citizens. But the system's machine doesn't listen to stories. It only stamps papers. When he was finally taken before a judge, the judge looked at him for no more than 5 seconds. "You have been in the United States for 15 years without legal status. Do you acknowledge this fact?" Ramon glanced at the court-appointed lawyer who couldn't even pronounce his name. "Yes, but I have a family, a job. My whole life is here." The judge sighed. "Your presence is illegal. Removal is ordered." The pen slid across the paper, and with that, everything Ramon had built was officially ignored. The phone rang at 8:22 a.m. Clara answered quickly, her eyes still swollen from a restless night. On the other end, a robotic, cold voice spoke without pause. "This is an automated notice. Ramon Garcia will be removed from the United States within the next 72 hours. For more information, contact your legal representative." She stayed still, holding the phone like it was a weapon. Sophia, sitting at the table, ate her cereal, unaware that the world was about to change. Matthias listened from the stairs, already used to hearing bad news behind closed doors. Clara sank to her knees, crying silently. There was no more time, no recourse, no miracle. In the following days, she tried to keep things normal, taking the kids to school, cooking, going to church, but everything felt like a poorly rehearsed play. Ramon's absence filled the house like smoke. "Will he come back, Mom?" Sophia asked one night, hugging her pillow. Clara didn't answer. She just ran her hand through her daughter's hair and stayed still, listening to her breathing until she fell asleep. Neighbors brought food. The pastor sent messages. Friends from work called, offering help. But what she needed couldn't be handed over on an aluminum plate. Ramon, inside the cell, didn't cry, but his body no longer reacted the same. He felt his muscles weaken, his mind numbed by waiting. Sometimes he dreamed of the garage, the smell of Sunday pancakes, his kids running in the yard. When he received the deportation date, he asked for one last thing. "Let me see my kids. Just for 5 minutes." The agent looked at him as if he were making an absurd request. "That's not in protocol." The white bus left the detention center at 4 a.m., its windows covered and the seats hard as stone. Ramon sat in the middle row, handcuffed at wrists and ankles. Around him, silence. No one cried. Some prayed quietly. Others just stared at the floor as if they had already left before their bodies did. Ramon thought of Clara, how she might be getting the kids ready for school, trying to smile through the knots in her throat. He thought of Sophia's drawings taped to the fridge, Matthias's cleats still needing to be bought, the bike he never fixed. He thought of everything he was leaving behind, and how he hadn't taken anything with him. The bus arrived at the airport at a remote gate. Others were already waiting there, eyes worn down. Ramon barely looked at the sky. The weight on his shoulders was heavier than the chains. At boarding, one of the agents slowly removed the cuffs. Ramon stood up and faced the airplane stairs like a man walking to the gallows. Inside, there were no assigned seats. Everything was generic, practical, like the way they were being discarded. Before takeoff, he closed his eyes and imagined Clara on the porch, waiting for him to come home. He pictured the sound of the key in the lock, the children running through the house, their small arms around his neck. And then, like a hard punch, the plane left the ground. No one applauded. No one said goodbye. Because it wasn't a return. It was a rupture. The America he had helped build with his own hands was now throwing him out, faceless, nameless, voiceless.
San Miguel, El Salvador, felt smaller. Or maybe Ramon had grown too big, full of years and things that no longer fit there. He stepped off the plane carrying a plastic bag, his return luggage, and a hollow emptiness heavier than anything he had ever carried. The heat was the same, but it no longer felt familiar. Dirt roads, the smell of corn in the air, colorful buses rushing by, all seemed distant, like an old memory that no longer fits the present. No one waited for him at the airport, no embraces, just the wind. He spent the first night at his older sister's house, a small room with a bed, too short, and the constant crowing of roosters outside. Ramon lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to remind himself he was still alive. Clara called every day, trying to sound strong. The kids ask about you. Matias has fallen silent. Sofia still leaves a place for you at the table. Tell them that Papa is working to come back. But he didn't believe it anymore. He tried to find work, but no one wanted to hire a middle-aged man outside the system, too far from a fresh start. He walked the streets like a ghost, a stranger in his own land. At night, he sat by the gate with an old radio, listening to American news in Spanish. It was his way of pretending he still belonged there. One day, Clara sent a photo. Sofia holding a sign at school. "My dad built this city." Ramon cried, not from pain, but from absence. Because the cruelest truth wasn't that he had been deported. It was knowing that, even though he had built the home, he never had the right to call it his own.